So many of us have identities that we don't even realize we've built. I'm the capable one, or the responsible one, or I'm the one who gets things done, or I'm the one who everyone can count on. But what happens when that version of you no longer works? My guest today calls this an identity rupture. That sometimes very unsettling space between who we've been and who we're becoming. Natasha knows this experience personally after spending 25 years in a career she had once loved. She followed the pole toward something new, but that transition also brought her face to face with just how much of her identity had become connected to being productive, organized, efficient, and highly capable. Our conversation became an exploration of what happens when we begin to question some of those identities. We talk about functional freeze, pushing and burnout, and the guilt that could come with slowing down, and why something unfamiliar can feel unsafe to our nervous system, even when it's something we genuinely want. And eventually, our conversation brought us to a question that I can't stop thinking about. Am I safe enough to be fully myself? Because sometimes becoming more of who we are means letting go of some of the ways we've learned to stay safe. So stay curious and enjoy my conversation with Natasha. Welcome to the Spiritually Curious Therapist, where science, spirit, and the self come together in the art of healing. I'm Jody Silverman, psychotherapist, Reiki master, and fellow seeker. Here we explore how presence, compassion, and nervous system wisdom helps us reconnect with the heart, the body, and the soul. Welcome back to the Spiritually Curious Therapist. Today I am here with Natasha Ramlall. Natasha works with high-functioning women experiencing the internal tremors of a life they no longer recognize. As an embodied integration coach, she facilitates the somatic mapping required to heal and evolve through an identity rupture, navigating the space between who you were and who you are becoming. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. I'm excited too. There's so much to talk about here. So, why don't we just start with you telling us a little bit about who you are and how you came to do the work that you're currently doing?
Sure. So I am, where do I start? It's interesting that every day I could answer the question in a different way, depending on what feels important. So today it feels important that I'm somebody who needs to ground and get outside and feel the sun on me to maintain a decent orientation to my life. I was sharing with you before we started recording that I had an unexpected morning of chaos, and just stepping outside for a 45-minute walk in the trees was enough to bring me back to a place where I felt ready to enter into this space and have this conversation with you. So that's a really important piece. And I call myself a people-loving introvert because I really do love humans. I'm fascinated by them. I love connecting with people at a deep level, but I'm also somebody who needs a lot of alone time to recharge my energy. I'm really passionate about the intersection of embodiment and spirituality, which is why I'm doing the work that I'm doing in this iteration. But really, I've been in the caring profession for a long time, and for about 25 years, I was working with adult newcomers and refugees settling in Canada. And that was around their English language acquisition and their settlement needs. But of course, at the center of that work is really about building community, building safety, and helping to give them a soft landing place while they're adjusting to this. That's a massive identity transition. And then I was doing that work for about 25 years. For 14 of those years, I was also leading a team. So there was sort of that other aspect to the work. And eventually I reached my growth edge with the work. I loved it. It was a really great experience for the majority of the time I was doing that work. But eventually I realized that I've stretched as far as I can go and I need to do something new. And it was also around that time that I had started to lean more fully into the mind body work that I'm doing now. And so I had one foot in each for a little while. But when I eventually stepped out of my old established career and really started to be fully in the business, the entrepreneurship of this work, and in addition to supporting women, which is what the work is about, I really realized that I never took a break between one form of emotional caring work into another form of emotional caring work. And I think that as somebody who is, like many of the women I work with, measures my worth by what I'm able to produce and contribute to the world. Yeah, I think I had just been pushing from that energy too long. And I had a bit of an identity rupture myself in terms of just shutting down and falling into a bit of a freeze response. And that was really unsettling because I didn't recognize myself. I'm somebody who's usually very productive and hyper capable. And so I realized that there are so many moving parts when we are making these big changes in our lives. And we live in a culture that has us up in our head most of the time. And so we see these transitions as sort of external situations that we need to manage. Whereas what I'm really interested in is actually the internal transformation that's happening and
Mhm.
what the invitation is in these moments to really learn yourself at a different level and then evolve from the experience into something that feels truer, that feels like it's moving you forward and allowing you to grow and expand in your life. So that's a windy way of answering your question, but that is the path that brought me to where I am today. There's that famous commencement speech by Steve Jobs that went viral for a while where he's talking about you can never know beforehand how all of the small things in your life are going to add up to that
Mhm.
place that you end up. But once you get there, you can look back and you can say, you can connect the dots and say, oh, yeah, all these little things ended up contributing to where I am now. And so it's like that. I can't really know for certain. It's definitely not been a linear path, but I feel like there are a lot of different areas of my life that have informed the work that I'm doing now. And so it feels I'm very interested in it, but I also feel like it is really rooted in my own lived experience. And I think that comes through and makes it a more powerful offer for the people that I'm able to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious if we go back for a moment. You spent a lot of time doing work with people who were immigrating to Canada and helping to create community for them and helping them to feel comfortable and safe in this new place. What was it like to realize this is great and wonderful, but there's something more?
It's such a great question because I'm also someone who has really grown up with a lot of shame and guilt around always having that inner voice that feels like something's off, but also at the same time recognizing my privilege in any given context and then feeling ungrateful and feeling unappreciative and feeling selfish for wanting to express whatever that thing inside is saying. And that has been a push pull for my entire life. It took me 4 decades to start to actually recognize that, oh, I understand why this is the way it is and start to respond to it. So that was a really key piece because you're in a position that it's not intolerable, it's safe, it's familiar. I'd done the work so, and I had become such an expert in how I was doing it and I had extended all of the different ways that I could come to it creatively. And I still felt this guilt. And at the end of the day, I had to recognize that if I'm not feeling present and I knew that fire was going out.
Can I pause you for a
Yeah,
second there? Because I'm curious.
sure.
How did you know that the fire was going out? What did that feel like in your body?
It was there would be moments where I was there in physical body, but I could feel myself almost dissociating from the moment. Yeah, there was a heaviness in my body, a bit of a draining feeling. It felt low energy. And I'm somebody who is, when I'm into something, when I'm passionate, and for the majority of those 25 years, I came with the energy. That was what drove me. It drove the classes. It inspired the students. And so when that piece was gone, it was really easy to feel. And then trying to force myself to bring that energy when it didn't feel authentically there was like a whole other level of drain and exhaustion. So yeah, it was really a tired feeling. I think that's probably the closest term I could use would be what burnout feels like. It was starting to just weigh on me. And for a profession that for many years I woke up excited to be able to do, that excitement had run its course. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so then you went on to describe being like drawn into this new the mind body work, but
Mm.
having not taken a break, experiencing what sounds like a I don't know if it was a functional freeze or a full out freeze. What was that like for you? Because I imagine you made the decision to leave to pursue this other line of work and then did not immediately feel that passion.
So it was definitely a functional freeze because I was getting things done. And as I had mentioned, I had one foot in both careers for a while. And to be honest, the service work, working with people one to one, facilitating groups, that actually what I did feel passionate about that. And it did light me up and it did motivate me to keep going and putting myself out there and doing all the vulnerable things that we have to do when we're stepping into a new iteration of our work. But what was really difficult was the whole entrepreneurship part of it and growing the business and having to step into that realm. And I think that the caring requires a lot of emotional energy, right? Like when you're holding space for nervous systems, there is a level of self-care that you need to maintain in order to be able to be attuned to the people that you're with.
Yeah.
And because the heavy load of trying to grow the business and, doing my own work to stay out of scarcity and urgency and all of the things that would drive me to push hard, I just reached a point where I was so completely exhausted that I did not recognize myself. I'm somebody who I suppose I took a lot of pride in being very organized, very efficient. I was the one that people relied on, great problem solver, got stuff done. And all of a sudden it was just like, oh, I just can't even imagine having to go to the grocery store. I can't believe I haven't done my laundry. Just these tiny little things
Yeah.
that really should not have been a big deal, all of a sudden felt like this mountain to climb over. And that was very unsettling, very disorienting because I realized, who am I? What have I done? And that was where a whole other level of all that I had already understood kind of came in. It was like the next layer of the onion was coming off and just recognizing how much familiarity and safety I experienced in knowing what to do and knowing what was next and having that clear path outlined in front of me. I'm a manifesting generator for anyone who's familiar with human design. So I'm like ideas all the time.
Yeah.
And also the willingness to go for it and create it and make it manifest in the world. But what I've had to learn is that not every idea that comes in needs to be followed. And that was a very important lesson for me. But in the beginning, I was following almost all of the ideas. And so energetically, I was just pushing and pushing. And I already was depleted of energy. So it was just this wicked tanglement of things happening all at once.
How did that feel?
It
to
felt
not,
scary. Yeah, it
yeah.
felt scary. It felt really scary to have an uncertain path in front of me. And, but I would waver because I also understood that in order for me to continue, I needed to lean into a level of surrender and trust. And so I would waver back and forth, right? Like this I would be, okay, let me just take my foot off the gas and let things ride for a little bit. And oftentimes that's when things would start to flow and feel a lot better and a lot easier. But then those old patterns would rush in and anxiety would provoke some sense of urgency. And then I would start to push again. And then I would come into exhaustion. It was almost like three distinct phases. There's that functional freeze where I'm just exhausted and I feel completely useless and like I'm wasting days. That push and almost trying to force my life into place. If I push hard enough, I can control the outcomes and be safe, even though cognitively I know that's absolutely a complete illusion. And then this beautiful third space that I will sometimes enter as well, where I recognize my pattern and I allow myself to just be with the discomfort. I give myself the spaciousness and the time and I slow down. And as I mentioned, that's usually when things start to move and feel better. And I guess the big lesson is that as much as I wish I could live in that place all the time, I can't. My life is a constant movement between these three parts of myself. But the progress is in recognizing that's what's happening and that every part or every phase has its place and every phase is perfectly fine when it's happening and just to be okay with it and settle into it and allow it to happen and take from that experience whatever it is that I need, whether that is, okay, so you're exhausted, rest. The world is not going to fall apart if you don't get laundry done today. Or, okay, you're in momentum, you're feeling in flow, you're excited about a project. Okay, push, but then notice when you're getting so out of balance that you're starting to go cross-eyed looking at the screen, right? And then those moments where you're enjoying settling into the feeling and just letting yourself really feel into it and grow the capacity for that presence, that level of presence and trust. Yeah.
I really love your acceptance and awareness of all three of these phases as part of who you are and how you move through the world, because I think that's so important for people to recognize, especially people who are high functioning and get stuck in that go-go. And the idea that these other two phases, although they don't feel as good as that third one doesn't exist without the other two. And
That's
so
right.
all three are necessary. That's blowing my mind a little bit. And I'm a manifesting generator also. So I completely get like all the ideas and trying to go down every single rabbit hole and then getting burned out. So I
Yeah.
can totally relate to that. What I'm curious about is how have you come to understand or know when you are in each state and when it's time to move, let's say, to the next one? And maybe it's not always conscious, maybe it's just acknowledging and accepting and being aware of when you naturally move. But how do those three different states feel in your body? What are your signals that, oh, I'm in this state. Oh, I'm in this state. Okay, now I'm shifting to this one.
That's a really great question. I don't think I've ever really considered it exactly in that way before. But certainly it's been a process of learning how to be in the experience of my body. And that's at the heart of the work that I do is coming back into the body and slowing it down and being in a present direct experience of my sensations. So I've become a lot more familiar with what different emotions feel like in my body in terms of that urgency, where I feel like I am, like I can feel it in my chest, where my breath is getting shorter, and it's almost like I need to be somewhere else, or I want to be somewhere else,
Mhm.
but I also have this thing that I'm trying to get done And there's this discomfort between staying and completing and actually following what my body is saying it wants to do. And part of the practice has been leaning into the messages of my body more rather than overriding it. That's another thing that culturally and in my family of origin was something that I was conditioned for, is overriding my own needs in order to be the efficient, productive, organized, get all the things done, responsible. And just noticing when my body is activated in any particular way. I'm a lot more familiar with what those sensations feel like in my body, so I can respond to them. In terms of moving between the different phases, I feel like that's almost more energetic. It's almost like if I'm in that place of exhaustion, there comes a point where energetically rest no longer feels restful. It feels like it's almost more exhausting to rest than to get into action. And so there's usually this sort of inner push to just get going. And it may not be related to the things that I am not feeling motivated by, but it will be other things. And then that will eventually bring me back into energy gets going and moving, and then things start to shift. The phase where I'm pushing, which has been a bit of a default setting, that one really gets to a place where I have complete brain fog and the cognitive load is so heavy, and I'm starting to get really impatient and snappy. And I can just feel like it feels like nothing's working. Nothing feels right. Nothing feels like it's easy. Everything feels hard. And when I get to that place, I recognize I need to step back because I'm not serving myself by pushing when I'm in this energy. And so I've gotten better at not getting to that extreme version all the time, but I still do get to that extreme version sometimes. And then that's that kind of beautiful space of just being, trusting, surrendering, and leaning into joy and presence. That the practice has just been letting myself feel that I deserve that and giving myself permission to do that without feeling guilty, without feeling ashamed, without feeling like it is any kind of indication of my worth. So they all have their lessons, right? They all have something for me if I'm willing to allow myself to be there and learn from it. Yeah.
I'm curious about the last thing that you said about allowing yourself to rest, to back off, to allow
Yeah.
without feeling shame or guilt or like you should be doing something. And we talk
Yeah.
about that a lot, right? We talk about that a lot in coaching and in therapy, and that's easy for us to say, not so easy to feel because the shame, the urgency, it shows up in our nervous system as part of those
Yeah.
old patterns that have become hardwired in our system. If
Yeah.
someone who's listening who's like, yes, I hear you, I am there, I am in it, I want to just relax but and step back and allow things to happen, but there's so much guilt when I do that, what would you say to them about how to show up to that guilt?
Yeah. I think that what I've come to understand is that we're in such a fast-paced world that we have prioritized living up in our heads in order to get our to-do list done. But because we're so oriented to that way of moving through our life, the list is never done. The list is never done, and we just continue to speed up. And now, with all of the screens and all of the different ways that we're experiencing life, like extra cognitively through a filter, through somebody else's experience. That orientation to speeding up and that kind of pacing of life has kept us out of what it feels like to be a human in a life. And one of the foundational practices that I do personally, but also in my work with other women, is resourcing, where we come into the body and we remember how to just be still and be present with whatever is true. And sometimes that means that we can expand into a feeling of safety or support or stillness or calm or even just neutrality and slow it down, because slowing down is absolutely required to be able to do that. And other times it means that we are growing our capacity to be with the feelings and emotions that are really uncomfortable and that really cause resistance in different parts of our body. And I think that coming back into that practice of what am I if I'm not a human here to embody the experience of being in my life?
Mhm.
And if I am, through the practice, I have learned that guilt and that shame is it's a reaction to something that is not a part of my actual present human experience. And so that has burst the illusion. And I think it's really, I think the awareness piece, so much of the stuff that is driving us is below our conscious awareness. And as soon as we're able to bring it into our awareness, it loses its power. And we start to understand, oh, my shame and my guilt have been driving all of these different behaviors, but they don't need to now that I understand why I feel so much shame and guilt. And so there's a lot of power in that. But I think it's a combination of those things. It's a combination of the awareness, understanding the why and the how of why of the life that we're in right now, but also coming back into what does it feel like to actually be a present human in the felt experience of their life. And it's like a door that you can't go back through. Once you start to understand your life from that lens, things shift in a way that are changed forever. And I really feel that I have walked through that door. I have helped a lot of others walk through that door. And I actually feel like collectively we're at a time in humanity's evolution where a lot of people are walking through that door. And that is a beautiful thing because it is what we need in order to usher in this better looking earth, this better looking way of being in our lives that everybody would really love to see. Yeah. I hope I answered that question. It was meandering, but
Yeah, no, it was a beautiful answer. I think it pulled in a lot of your philosophy, the way that you've come to understand not only the world and consciousness, but also what it means to be a human, or what it means to be a spirit inhabiting a human body here on this
yeah,
earth. And part of that is learning how to be with and being curious about some of the more uncomfortable sensations, including feelings such as guilt and shame, part of the journey, and
yeah.
and bringing that into conscious awareness so that we are not subconsciously reacting in ways that aren't for our greater good. So,
Yeah, I remember this story. I have a friend who I've actually have a lot of friends who are teachers, and one of my good friends that I grew up with, we met in grade two, so we've known each other for a long time. And she's a teacher, and I remember the one day she was off for some reason. I think she had a doctor's appointment or something, and on her way back to work, she saw people just sitting outside a cafe, chatting and having lunch or something. And it occurred to her for the first time, and this just blows my mind, but I think it's a really powerful example or metaphor. She was just blown away. She was like, oh, there's just people out here living their lives while I'm in my teaching routine. There are other people that are just going about their day and doing all these different things. And because we start school from 3, 4, 5 years old, and we're in school until we graduate, and then we go on to further education for a lot of people. In her case, that was the situation. She went to school, then she trained to be a teacher, and then she got a job as a teacher. So her whole life up to that point had been framed by
Hmm.
this Monday to Friday, 9 to whatever schedule. And so her understanding of her human experience was structured by that limited view. And it took this one moment was just something cracked. And she was just like, life isn't just this limited view that I've always had of it. And I feel like that's in a different way, maybe a bigger scale. That's what happens when we return to the body. We realize that, oh my gosh, I've been living my life with this limited box that is just the way that my head cognitively understands it and makes stories that create meaning about my life. But when I actually enter into the felt experience of my body, when I start inviting my emotional energy back into the conversation, and I start to understand all of the different parts of me that are functioning for me to be in this experience, yeah, just the potential and the limitations drop away in a new way. And we start to understand our lives in a very different way. And it's powerful, very powerful.
It is. And it can also be very, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Unsettling,
Yes,
right? And
absolutely.
to go back to come full circle, where you talked about your experience, although it wasn't having that aha moment, it was a little bit more involved, but it was a moment when you were like, oh, this is not who I am. What is
Mhm.
happening here? That sense of unsettling. So, this is a great segue to move into what happens when our identity, the one that we have grown up with, and the one that gets reflected back to us by our sometimes very small external world, no longer fits who we are.
Yeah. So I think that it can it's going to feel unsettling, as you said, and uncomfortable. The way that we respond to that discomfort really varies from person to person. And I think that there are healthier ways of managing that discomfort and unhealthier ways. And depending on what capacity we have in our lives at that time, or what support or what understanding and awareness we have at that time, will dictate how we react. When I was in my mid 20s, I had a pretty significant change. I had been traveling on my own in Asia. I was young and free and learning about myself for the first time. And I ended up falling in love with a man, and we got married, and we got pregnant with our first child on our honeymoon. So within a very short amount of time, I went from being this carefree traveler to coming back to Canada to sponsor my new husband, a wife, a mother. And so it at that time, because of the nature of what had happened so quickly, and that was a massive identity rupture.
Yeah.
But I just went into survival mode. I didn't I didn't freeze in that moment. I pushed. I went into a sympathetic fight state, and and I think that's how I became the hyper capable, high productive woman that I was for many decades after that, because that was how I responded to my external circumstances and got through my life. But with this more recent transition out of my 25-year career into a new business and a new way of showing up in the world, I could not sustain that. My nervous system couldn't sustain that state, and it just shut me down. And there were other things along the life journey as well, like chronic pain, different health diagnoses, a lot of different points along our journey that are saying, hey, slow down, take a look at this. Maybe something is off here. But again, if we're not aware, we don't have the capacity or the support to actually stop and make space for those investigations, we may just keep pushing, keep doing whatever it is that we understand is going to get us out of that discomfort and out of that safety. And so what I've come to learn is that it's actually the reverse that brings us back into safety is understanding that those patterns and those survival mechanisms that have been driving us are actually not where we derive safety from. It's misinformed. And we need to return back to a deeper internal understanding and a deeper knowing of ourselves in order to find safety in a life that's going to inevitably have many unsafe events.
One of the things that came up for me as you were explaining that was a couple things. One is knowing the difference or coming to understand the difference between something that is unfamiliar versus something that's unsafe, which oftentimes we conflate the two because our nervous system sees things that are unfamiliar as unsafe. And we automatically respond in that way. And what I'm wondering is, do you think that some people stay dysregulated because the nervous system is protecting an identity that no longer fits them because of the fear of something that's unfamiliar potentially?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's there are a lot of different ways to be stuck in different states of the nervous system, and we may not understand that's what's going on, right? So I've spoken with a lot of women who are just completely exhausted and completely stuck, but they don't recognize that they have come into this protective dorsal vagal freeze state where they are actually protecting themselves from something that something in their mind body system is deeming as incredibly threatening and dangerous. I've had other women who are incredibly angry and they just don't understand why. They just feel like they want to rage all the time and it's impacting their relationships and they don't know why they can't get control of that. And again, they're not recognizing that they may be stuck in a sympathetic state of trying to protect themselves as well. So yeah, absolutely think that a lot of the challenges that we're experiencing in our day-to-day lives and in the outcomes of our behaviors and actions are rooted in that safety piece. Something in our system deems that it is safer for us to remain stuck in this state of our nervous system than it is to change and do something different and unfamiliar, as you say. And I think that is another reason why the resourcing practice is really important because when we are able to have that anchor of safety, we can step into some of those experiences in a way that's a little bit more controlled. And we're not at as much of a risk of it just flooding our system and keeping us stuck even more so in that state. Yeah, the safety piece is everything, right?
Yeah.
Everything we can do to find our way back to safety, I think, is the starting point of any kind of sustainable healing or expansion or growth that we can do.
Yeah, I know for me, I'm always sharing with people, our nervous system is constantly asking the question, am I safe? That is
Right.
its number one job, is to figure out whether we're safe or not. And as we're talking, I'm thinking like I'm adding a piece to that, which is, am I safe enough to be fully myself? Which like is
Right.
a whole other layer to what it means to be safe. Because I think about Gabor Mate and like the idea of authenticity versus connection, which are like two
Right.
basic human needs, but when the two are in conflict with each other, connection will win out every time, which means it's not safe enough to be yourself because being authentic ruptures the connection.
Right.
So there's a lot to uncover around that when you're doing your personal work. And I'm wondering, okay, so given all of that, coming back to what you said about resourcing and the importance of that, because I'm not sure that everybody fully understands what that means. And I know that you have a practice on your website that people can access. Can you explain a little bit more about what resourcing is, why it's important in this process of like moving through an identity rupture, and how people can access your free gift?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, as I mentioned before, I see it as really foundational. And what resourcing is understanding that regardless of what's happening in the external world, there is a way of finding or coming into the felt experience of our body and finding just a glimmer, or sometimes it's a little bit larger than that, of stillness or neutrality or calm, or for some people, support, safety, groundedness, and sort of anchoring our experience in that and allowing it to kind of create a sensation of safety within the present moment. It's really that feeling of, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm safe in this moment. I can exist in this moment. I'm not falling apart. I have some sense of control over my experience in this moment, and not letting all of the external noise sort of take away our agency from coming into our own sense of spaciousness within. And the reason it's important is, as I was saying before, that if we are trying to do any kind of healing work, thinking about past traumas or undigested life experiences, or going into memories or incidents that make us feel triggered or emotionally activated, if we just stay up in ruminating, spiraling on the stories of what's happened, all we're doing is re-traumatizing ourselves. We're just making those grooves even deeper. But if we have a resourced place of safety within us that we can come back into and just dip our toe into some of the more difficult stuff, that's how we can grow our capacity and our resilience to be able to experience some of the more difficult, painful, contracted emotions of our experience. Yeah. I think what you were saying before about the authenticity versus attachment piece is really important too, because a lot of the feelings that we are often resistant to feeling, like I've had women that I've met who they don't like to cry and they don't like to go anywhere near sadness. I have other women who will not get angry. They will just stuff down that rage and will not allow themselves to express anger. And when you're able to actually trace back where that originated, it will often be because of that attachment versus authenticity piece, where your caregivers, whether it was explicit or not, gave you the messaging that if you show your sadness, if you show your anger, or whatever the emotion may be, you're going to risk losing their love. And then we extrapolate that, and as we get older, that becomes our friends and our peers and our coworkers, and the whole world becomes that mirror of what is safe to feel and what isn't safe to feel. And so a lot of the work that I do with women, and particularly in the group work that we do in person, a lot of it is about practicing leaning into our authenticity in a place where we can be witnessed and accepted in that, so that we can rewire our understanding of what is safe to feel. And the beauty of that, because it's not an easy practice, it's actually a really difficult practice, but the beauty of it is that then the relationships that we form from that place that's more authentic, the love that we gain from that is just so much fuller and so much deeper, because it's based in a love of our authentic selves rather than a love of the one that we have been curating in order to stay safe, and because that's the version of us that we think we need to be in order to have connection. So I mean, it's everything. It's really everything. Coming into the body, understanding those feelings, understanding why they're there, where they came from, and then understanding how to come back into relationship with them in a safe way. Yeah, it's so beautiful and complex, but simple at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's simple but not easy, is what
Yeah,
I often will
yeah,
tell people.
exactly.
Absolutely. So, as we start to wrap up, is there anything that we have not talked about that you would like our audience to know?
To be honest, I feel like we've brought in a lot of really important things. The only thing I would say is that I do feel like right now we're at a moment where people are feeling a lot of discomfort. And I just want to say that I do believe that there is a greater purpose for all of the struggle and pain and dysregulation and disorientation. And I do think that in the same way that these identity ruptures can be a catalyst for us to change our personal experience of life, I think that these greater ruptures that we're seeing in the world and the collective experience can also be a catalyst for something beautiful to emerge. And so, from that lens, I would just invite people to find the glimmers of hope in some of the more distressing things that we're seeing in the world right now, because I really do believe that something beautiful will eventually be birthed from the intolerable. And what works on a micro level works on a macro level and vice versa. So I hope that is comforting and not bothersome for people to hear, but I do think it can be a good reminder.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful message to intentionally and mindfully look for the helpers. Mr. Rogers
Mr.
would say
Rogers, yeah. Yeah.
that. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today, Natasha. And I will put your website information and everything in the show notes so that people have access to that resourcing meditation that you have.
Perfect.
And
Excellent.
yeah. So thank you again for your time. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you too, Jody. I appreciate you.
Yeah, you're welcome.